Before I go any further, I should just mention that with Windows 10 1703, on which the exam is currently based, this is called Windows Firewall. But in Windows 10 1709, it's referred to as Windows Defender Firewall. So you might find the terminology changing at the moment. Anyway, when you connect your computer to a network, you potentially expose it to security risks. To help mitigate, you would implement a firewall, such as Windows Firewall. That's a host-based firewall. It allows or blocks inbound and outbound traffic based on configurable rules. It also provides a means of authenticating network traffic and providing encryption for data in transit. This is the Windows Firewall control panel applet. You can see here that we have private networks and guest or public networks. And at the moment we have the firewall state is on, and incoming connections and active private networks are, as listed here, block all connections to apps that are not on the list of allowed apps, and we're connected to a private network called Pearson.com. The notification state is notify me when Windows Firewall blocks a new app. So those are the default values. On the left hand side here you can see a navigation pane allowing you to view advanced settings, to restore defaults, to turn the firewall on or off. It's not recommended that you disable it. And to change notification settings, and to allow an app or feature through the firewall, which we'll take a look at shortly. So to allow an app through the firewall, you can use the netshish command, specifically netshish firewall add allowed program, and then the name of the executable, and then the keyword enable. Alternatively, you can use the control panel tool and click the option for allow a program through the firewall, and then as you can see here you've got a list of options. These are known programs, these are allowed apps and features, and you can also see, because this is a non-domain network, that we have the option to configure for private and public networks. This allows us to set different security settings based on whether we're connected to a private or a public network. Down the bottom you've got an allow another app. This is in case the app that you want to allow is not listed in the allowed apps and features list, and then you can specify it by browsing to the executable for the app. This is the easiest way of allowing for an exception through the firewall. Let's take a look at how to configure Windows Firewall and how to allow an app through Windows Firewall. Okay, let's take a look at the basic Windows Firewall configuration. We can see at the moment that we are using a private network. That's the location profile that's been configured on the network adapter. It's connected to a network called Pearson.com. And the firewall state is on for private networks. And the notification state is notify me when Windows Firewall blocks a new app. By default, incoming connections are block all connections to apps that are not on the list of allowed apps. To change the notification settings, we click on the change notification settings option, and then we can specify for private networks block all incoming connections, including those on a list of allowed apps. Turn the firewall off, which is not something I'd recommend. And likewise for public networks we can configure the same options. To enable an app through the firewall, click allow an app or feature through the Windows Firewall. And then you scroll down and you can see a list of allowed apps and features that have been predefined. So for example, if you're intending to use branch cache, you can enable the appropriate app and feature here. Notice that you can also do this for both private and public networks. We scroll down, home group. So if you decide to run your home group, you want to enable those features through the firewall, you can check this box and then enable it for a private network. Notice that home group cannot be enabled on a public interface because home groups are not supported on a public interface. Some of the remote desktop features must be manually configured here. So if I want to enable remote desktop between this computer and another computer, then I would enable the remote desktop at the remote end. If I want to perform remote management, I may need to enable some of these features here. If there's a particular app that I want to use that's not listed here, I can click allow another app, and then I can browse and locate the path on the local computer. So if I want to configure something a bit more advanced, I'm going to choose Advanced Settings. This opens up a new management console window, Windows Firewall with Advanced Security. You can see a list of the inbound rules. These are the predefined inbound rules. And you'll notice these branch cache ones. If you remember, we could have enabled those features through the allow an Apple feature through the firewall, and that would have changed the inbound rules consequently. These are the outbound rules. Those with a green checkbox are the ones that are enabled. And then I'll talk about connection security rules and monitoring in a moment. So let's scroll down here. See all the various rules. To create a new rule, you click New Rule for inbound, and you specify that it's a program or a port or a predefined option, such as the NetLogon service or remote desktop, or it's custom so that you can be a bit more specific. We'll choose custom. On a custom rule, you can specify not only whether it's a program, but also protocols and ports and the scope. We won't do anything with programs here. But on protocols and ports, what I want to do is to enable ICMP, in other words, to enable ping. So protocol type is ICMP version 4. From any address to any address. Allow the connection. This will apply to private and public network interfaces and also domain interfaces. We're not connected to domain, so for this particular computer that won't be relevant. And then I'm going to give it a name, ICMP v4, and click Finish. So if someone attempts to ping this computer now, the ICMP v4 rule will allow that communication. I want to do the same at the remote end. Windows Service Firewall is configured in the same way. I've switched to a server here. Let's open up the Windows Firewall with Advanced Security snap-in, and again on inbound rules we're going to say New Rule. It's custom. Doesn't apply to a particular program. It uses a specific protocol, ICMP4. From any address to any address. Allow the connection for all network profiles. We'll call it ICMP v4 again and say Finish. And so between these two servers, or between this server and any other device, and likewise between the other device and any other device, ICMP packets are going to be allowed in. I'm just going to test that now by switching to the other computer. So I've switched now to my Windows 10 device, and I'm going to open up a command prompt. And if I ping dc.pearson.com, we see that it's allowed. Now I'm going to change the rule on the server end to block ICMP packets. So I'm going to switch to that window now. And if I open up the rule that I created, inbound rule, which hopefully is in here somewhere. There it is. If I edit the properties of that rule and say block the connection, so you can see now it's got a little no entry sign. And if I switch back to the client and repeat that, we see that it's unsuccessful. Now this is only in one direction, so this is, in this instance, it's being blocked inbound at dc.pearson.com. Okay. So in the demonstration you saw how to configure Windows Firewall and how to allow an app through the firewall. Windows Firewall with Advanced Security allows you to configure security rules, connection security rules. These provide for authentication and optionally encryption on the wire. To access this tool, open up Control Panel, navigate to Windows Firewall with Advanced Security. We've already seen how you can create inbound rules. These are program rules, port rules, predefined rules, and custom rules. You can also create outbound rules and connection security rules. A connection security rule enables you to configure isolation rules, This ensures that communication can only occur between computers that have the same security settings and are configured by the same connection security rule. All other computers can't communicate, so those computers are isolated. Authentication exemption rules. These are exemptions to the previous isolation rule, so you could specify that some computers won't adhere to a particular security standard for whatever reason. Server-to-server rules, so communication between server A and server B, or between all computers in one location and all computers in another location, will be encrypted and authenticated along the lines of the rule. Tunnel rules between two endpoints, and then a hybrid. You've got the ability to create custom rules which might use any or all of those previous characteristics. Let's have a look at a demonstration on how to create an authentication rule, and then we'll test the rule. So another thing we can do is we can configure authentication rules. If we go back to Windows Firewall with Advanced Security and click on Connection Security Rules, it's possible for me to create a mechanism to authenticate and or encrypt communications on the wire between one or more devices, between two or more devices. To do this, I need to create a new connection security rule. You can see here that there are a number of different types of rule. Isolation, which restricts connections based on authentication criteria. So for example, you might say that only devices that can authenticate in a particular way, i.e. they're members of the same domain, can communicate. You can create exemptions to those sorts of authentication rules, so these particular computers do not need to authenticate, whereas all the others do. You can use server-to-server communications between two particular machines. That's what I'm going to do in a moment. A tunnel between two specific computers, or a custom rule. Well, I'm going to create a server-to-server authentication connection. Now I can specify this between particular IP addresses, so computer X and computer Y, for example. Because this is a demonstration, I want to move it fairly quickly. I'm just going to say between any computers. Now I can choose to request authentication for inbound and outbound connections. I can require authentication for inbound connections and request it for outbound, or I can require for both inbound and outbound. Well, I'm going to choose the middle road here, the middle path. I'm going to choose require authentication for inbound connections. So if someone attempts to communicate with this machine, they'll need to authenticate. Now there are a number of authentication mechanisms. Clearly, the inbound connection must support the same authentication method as being defined here. So I can choose a computer certificate and then configure its details. Or I can go for advanced, choose customized, and then choose one or several different methods. I'm going to choose just one method, and I'm going to say that we'll use computer authentication using Kerberos version 5, or for demonstration purposes, so we can see what I'm doing, I'm going to use a pre-shared key. That's not very secure, but it will help us demonstrate the point. So I'm using the pre-shared key of this. It's like a password if you like, and click OK. So any computer that attempts to connect to this computer must authenticate using that secret key, otherwise communications will not be allowed. I'm going to apply that to all of the profiles, and I'm going to give that a name of shared key authentication, or words to that effect. There we go. So that's now been set up. So it requires inbound authentication. Now for this to work properly, the other end needs to be aware of that. So I'm going to switch over to the server and click on Connection Security Rules and create a new connection security rule. Server to server from any IP addresses. Require authentication for inbound and request it for outbound. Advanced, customize, and select shared key again. Enter the same shared key. Apply it to all profiles and call it shared key authentication. So we've set that up. Now we've still got a rule that's going to block ICMP packets. So let's go back to inbound rules. We have ICMP blocked on the server. So in other words, the server will reject. I'm going to change that now. I'm going to say properties, and I'm going to allow the connection if it's secure. I'm going to customize it, and I can say here, allow the connection if it is authenticated and integrity protected, require the connections to be encrypted, allow the connection to use null encapsulation or override block rules. Well, I'm going to go for the first here, allow the connection if it's authenticated. So you can see that symbol now changes to a padlock. So now I need to switch over to the client computer and switch the command prompt, and we'll repeat our ping to the server. So let's just remind ourselves where we're at. Both computers have configured a connection security rule that requires authentication using the shared key, which they both know. The server is going to block all ICMP packets unless they've been successfully authenticated. So I'm expecting this to work after authentication has been negotiated. So there, we're getting a reply straight away. That's pretty encouraging. Now I'm going to switch back to the server so you can see what's actually going on. If we click on Connection Security Rules, and then if we go to Monitoring, expand that out and click on Connection Security Rules, you can see the rule there. And let's see if that's in use. If we expand Security Associations, there we are. We can see that there is a connection from a computer with the address of 100, that's the Windows 10 computer, to this local computer. And we can see some properties there. It's using the first authentication method of pre-shared key. Under quick mode, we can see what ESP integrity mechanism it's using, and that it's not using any kind of encryption because we didn't ask for that. So that was fairly successful then. So you can use inbound and outbound rules to define the flow of traffic. Optionally, you can use connection security rules to provide for authentication and encryption, if you wish, communicating between designated devices. Now, I've configured these rules using the local Windows Firewall with Advanced Security console, but you can also use group policy to configure the same settings and have those settings apply to all of the devices in your organization. In the demonstration, you saw how to create an authentication rule and how to test it. When you're managing Windows Firewall, you can also use the following Windows PowerShell commandlets. It's useful to know these for the exam. Get net firewall rule, enable net firewall rule, disable net firewall rule, and new net firewall rule, and finally set net firewall rule. New to Windows 10 in 1703 and newer is the Windows Defender Security Center. It's unlikely this will appear on the exam, but it's worth having a look at. It provides a consolidated interface using a Microsoft Store app which is built into Windows 10. And you can see here you can access virus and threat protection, device health, device performance and health, firewall and network protection, family options, and so on. So anytime you need to access Windows Defender or Windows Firewall, or Windows Defender Firewall as it's now known, your first stop should be the Windows Defender Security Center.